I actually had a lot of therapists in the family, and so I had some good models of people who do this work and who enjoy working for themselves. And also, I'd always been really interested in psychology and, the brain. And so it was a kind of a natural fit for me. And so actually I started out working in a different field, but I kept kind of gravitating back.
Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Annie Miller. She's a psychotherapist, part of DC Metro Therapy, and we're going to talk about her work. So, Annie, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Well, very good. Well, tell me about your psychotherapy practice. What got you into it, and what do you focus on?
Yeah, sure. So what got me into psychotherapy is, I actually have a lot of therapists in the family, and so I had some good models of people who, do this work and who enjoy working for themselves. And also, I'd always been really interested in psychology and, the brain. And so it was a kind of a natural fit for me. And so, actually I started out working in a different field, but I kept kind of gravitating back to this field. And then I would say in the last, 5 to 10 years have really built this practice in the DC area. So kind of built up a private practice.
What kind of people do you counsel? Like, do you counsel our people in government or like regular folks?
So yes, so a little bit of everything. I mean, yes, in DC there's a lot of government people, politics, stuff like that. So yeah, certainly a lot of different kinds of people are, in the DC area, State Department, stuff like that. And, our practice is really focused on a couple of main things, one of them being sleep and insomnia. The other one being anxiety, and, also we focus on trauma and then chronic pain. So those are our specialty areas, and, anything that's related to that, whatever kind of people have those issues, that's what we end up working with and seeing.
If you don't mind, can I ask you about anxiety? Seems, with the pandemic and stuff, everyone's more anxious than before, more head trauma or head trash than before. What are you noticing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the pandemic, it has really increased anxiety. I've noticed that it's been interesting. There's some people who were actually a lot less anxious when they had to stay home all the time. Like people who are generally anxious and introvert type who, were when they were forced to stay at home, they didn't have to interact with people. It was actually a relief. And so that relieved anxiety for some people. And then there were some people who that made them way more anxious. Now that things are starting to really open up, I'm in the DC area, so, things are certainly getting back to normal here. And that's making a lot of people feel anxious because, we're told stay home, wear a mask, do all this stuff. And then, all of a sudden it's different. And I think it's what I'm really noticing is that people are anxious going back to their old routines and like doing some activities that they've been told not to do for so long. It's making people feel anxious.
I guess there's when people have gotten to the point where
wearing a mask, for instance, is a comfort to them, or, these protocols for somehow they made them feel safe for so long that they don't want to give them up?
Yeah. And also, if you really think about it, we've been told to do things a certain way. And we've been told for, over a year, these things aren't safe. And then we have to kind of make that switch in our brain. All of a sudden, oh, it's fine to do that. For some people, it's welcome, right? And they're ready to go out and socialize. Other people aren't. And that's hard to make that transition. And they're struggling. So I think it's a mix of both. Some people are desperate to get back to what they've been doing. And some people just really are struggling.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So, I don't know, do you have a section of your psychotherapy literally like post-COVID counseling? Have you labeled it, or have you seen any therapists label that, apply it?
That's a good question. I haven't specifically labeled it myself in that way. Listen, I kind of think everyone is a little bit post-COVID at this point. I think some of us have more resilience with it than others, and some of us are able to kind of, adjust and go back into things. But I kind of think all of us have it a little bit. And so generally, I think most therapy practices are pretty busy right now in general. So I think most therapists are thinking of themselves as post-COVID, just as a whole.
Yeah, and I saw somewhere in some article, it's like someone was offering like a re-entry therapy for people to re-enter society. And like you said, some of them were having a hard time with it. So I didn't know if it was, they just, like you said, therapists are busy. They don't really need to market it that way. But I guess they're having a lot of conversations around this, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a way to do it. I think some people need some, kind of exposure activities where you're, starting to get back into doing things a little bit at a time, getting yourself used to it a little bit at a time, which I guess that's how I would think about doing reentry therapy. But yeah, I think every therapist kind of has their different approaches, different ways that they do things, and different, tools that they use with clients.
Yeah. What have you noticed about people, over the past year and a half? Like, do they have trouble with family relationships, or is there more problems, with them and their children? Like, what kind of dynamics have you seen in people's relationships? What are the changes you've seen?
Yeah, I think again, it's kind of all over the map, right? Because I think there's some people where the dynamic was, so I'll give you an example. For instance, like in a couple, let's say where one of the partners was traveling a lot for work, and then all of a sudden the pandemic shut it down, and then they're trapped in a house or in a space together. That, I think that could go either way. It could be really great. It could be really bad. So I think there's an increase in separation with all of this, because, all of a sudden things really changed really quickly. But I think some people will just welcome family time, and so I've seen a whole range. Really, yeah, like really strained relationships where people are driving each other nuts, and, it's really tough but also I've seen people really get a lot closer and have this valued, amazing family time. And it just depends. It depends on the situation and on the person.
But this probably tells you maybe best practices. Like if you see some clients that are really successful with improving their family relationships, then other ones where it's a problem, maybe you could, kind of borrow what the successful people are telling you and tell the unsuccessful people here, maybe try this.
Yeah. Well, and I think what happened is the pandemic just exacerbated a lot of underlying issues that were there. So, if there was family dynamic issues and then everyone's trapped at home, it's just going to, kind of explode at a certain point, right? Because, everything's all intensified. It's really specific to the person and to the family and to what's going on with them. And it's really interesting to see, because there's issues that just, I don't know, that I think that we weren't aware of before. Now, you didn't really have to think about what it would be like to be trapped, and to be quarantined with people. It just wasn't something that we would have really necessarily thought about.
How has this affected the insomnia part of your practice? Has it worsened it for people, or, what have you noticed there?
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you asked about that, because, yeah, that is a big problem right now. I think insomnia as a problem has just really grown. And in, this past year, more and more people are really struggling with insomnia. And I think there's a number of reasons for it related to the pandemic. I'd be happy to give you my thoughts on if you want.
Yeah, tell me. Yeah, so what have you noticed in the insomnia world?
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now, back to the show.
So I'm coming from a place where I work with insomnia from a behavioral perspective, right? So I'm helping people change their habits and routines around sleep, also working on their thoughts, their negative thoughts around sleep. So all of a sudden people aren't commuting anymore. And to a large degree, I mean, some people are commuting, but to a large degree, people are still working from home. So what's happened is their schedules are more flexible. So, what that's done is it's pushed people to wake up a little later. And when that happens, for some people, that's great. But getting off of a sleep schedule and getting off of a routine can really impact a lot of people, and so then they are up later and then they're kind of all off of a routine. So that can bring on insomnia. The other thing that I think has impacted insomnia is a lot of people don't have small spaces to work from. So people are working in all kinds of spaces, including their bedroom and their bed. A lot of people working in bed. And this is one of the things that I teach people not to do, is anything else other than sleep in bed. And so when you're working all day in bed, it's really going to impact sleep.
Yeah, what if I work all day in bed and then, I lay down to go to sleep at night? What happens psychologically that causes me a problem?
So what's happening is you're creating an association that the bed is for something else other than sleep, right? And that's where I sit and work and, in fact, might feel stressed or might, have a deadline or, have to work, have to get back to someone. And so what ends up happening is then the brain makes that association. So then when you get back to go in bed at night, it remembers that, and it's harder to sleep. So keeping the bed only for sleep is hugely important. That's one of the first rules that I talk to people about when it comes to insomnia.
And I would bet too that even before the pandemic, people taking phones into their beds, like, yeah, I got to bug my kids about this. I'm like, turn the phone off and don't have it in the bed next to you, because I don't know what, they'll never go to sleep if they're laying there on the phone. So I'm sure that's a big part of the problem too.
Yeah. And what I tell people, and it may be a little surprising to hear this, but it's not necessarily the screen, it's the bed. So I'm fine with someone looking at their phone on a couch, but when it's time for bed, put the phone down and then get in bed. And the bed is just for sleep, right? So that you were using the bed just for sleep. We're not letting the brain associate anything else with the bed. So trying to create that strong, like Pavlovian response that when you get in bed, you immediately feel sleepy because it's a cue for sleep.
Maybe you should tell people that think of your bed as a giant screen that only shows blankets and pillows on it. And maybe then they'll be more willing to go to bed.
Well, it's just, I think people underestimate this link that our brain makes. And in fact, people underestimate just the power of conditioning in general and how strong how strong these associations can be for our brain.
Yeah, I noticed everything you're saying is right. Like in my family, everyone started going to sleep later and later and getting up later and later. And at first it seemed to be okay, but yeah, it's a problem. Kids don't do well if they go to bed later, and pretty much everybody, I'm a super late night owl, but the rest of my family has kind of come more into my schedule, and it's a problem. So it's harder to get back to an earlier schedule after you've been doing it for a while.
Yeah. It's not necessarily, some of us are more night owls. Like you might be somebody who wants, is kind of inclined to stay up later and maybe sleep a little later. That might be your natural schedule, right? That's not such a bad thing in and of itself, right? What you don't want to do is you don't want to try to force yourself to go to bed early and then just lie there. So this is the other part of insomnia. What I teach people is if you're lying there trying to sleep, you're doing it wrong, because that also is going to create another association, right, with the bed and stress. And this is where I, kind of freak out because I can't sleep. And so we don't want to allow our brain to make those connections. And so, in fact, going to bed later is not such a big deal.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
If that's your schedule, if that's what you like to do, the key to all this is really waking up at the same time every day, giving yourself some real structure to your wake time, making sure that you really stick to a pretty solid wake time. So even if you do go to bed later than usual one night, still get up at the same time every day. It's not going to be the easiest, most fun day, but you're going to kind of set yourself on a routine, and it's going to be better.
Yeah, what happens if I want to go to bed by 10, I have to get up at 6 or something, let's say, and my bedtime is slipped till like 1 or 2. How do I get myself back to the old schedule?
So then get up at 6, right? So you get up at the same time.
And you'll be dead tired the first day at least, but how long would it take me to, I'm just, as an example, how long would it take someone to get to their old schedule?
I mean, I think it depends. There's not a set amount of time, but if you give yourself that like short night, right, the first night, you're going to be really tired the next night. And, I think people are viewing the amount of sleep they need as incorrect. So I think everyone has this 8-hour goal, and that's not really the case for most people. So like for me, if I sleep 8 hours, I don't always feel that great. I actually feel better at 7. And that's the case for a lot of people. So somewhere between 6 and 9 is pretty normal. And if it's 6, people really think that's wrong, but it depends on you and your body. So I think that's part of too for some people what goes wrong with sleep is they're ending up spending 8 hours like lying in bed, but not 8 hours of sleep. And that lying in bed time is what's making them have more insomnia.
Well, so what happens? Someone lays in bed, and what's the average time after which they're like, I'm not falling asleep, what am I going to do? And, when does the psychological problem start happening? How long lay in bed on average?
So I tell people 15 to 20 minutes, and that's it. That's all you get for lying in bed.
Oh, so if it's more than that, what does that tell you?
So if it's more than that, then that's what we call, in behavioral sleep, we call it sleep effort, right? So when you're putting effort towards sleep, which you shouldn't be doing, because sleep isn't something natural. It should come naturally, right? And so, if you're putting a lot of effort towards sleep, that is one of the things that can really drive sleep effort.
Well, I had to tell myself sometimes, like, I'm over 40, so sometimes I tell myself, like, look, I've fallen asleep for like 40 plus years without a problem. Why would I have a problem tonight? Or then I thought, I've fallen asleep, about 12,000 times approximately in my life, so I can do it one more time. Things like that, I can tell myself. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, well, and I guess my approach is more like, what's the worst that's going to happen, right? So if you can't sleep, so what? Because the truth is, everyone is kind of panicked about what's going to happen to them if they can't sleep. And as a parent, right, you mentioned you have children, like, if you have kids, you go through periods of not sleeping, right, when your kids are born, or sometimes way after that. And, this is part of being a parent. And I get a lot of clients that I work with who tell me, I'm concerned about the health problems. I'm concerned, and people will even say, I think I'm going to die because I don't sleep enough. And I always give them this example. What are you so worried about? Do you think that like new parents just drop dead? No, right? Because every new parent goes through a pretty significant lack of sleep. No one dies. Nothing bad happens.
Yeah, no, it's true. I've heard from some therapists, they'll say like someone comes into their office, they're like, I haven't slept in 20 years. And it's not possible. They would be dead. I mean, do you get stories like that? And what do you tell people that say that?
Well, yes, that's definitely not true. And sometimes, when I do this sleep work with people, I have them keep a sleep diary, and sometimes, people's perception of what's happening, I think is a little bit different from what is actually happening. Sometimes it's hard to tell, but that's something that I try to work on with them. But yeah, I think people tend to feel like that. And, people's perceptions of their sleep, I don't know, a negative perception of sleep, I think impacts it more than the actual sleep itself. So if you're feeling stressed about what your sleep is like and how bad it is, that's going to be way worse for you than actual bad sleep. That's what I tell them.
Yeah, I mean, one trick I've tried is like, for me, let's say 8 hours is good. If I lay down and I know I have 9 hours, it relaxes me and I'm able to sleep better because I'm like, you know what, if it takes me a little while to fall asleep, that's okay because I'll still get the 8. But if, I'm on a tight deadline and I go to bed and it's like you get 7.5 at best for stress. Because I'm like, oh no, if I don't fall asleep quick, then it may get only 7 or 6.5 hours.
Yeah.
So I don't know if psychologically if that tricks help or.
Maybe, but here's the thing is if you're not thinking about it at all and you're just right. So if you know anyone in your life who is a really good sleeper and you think about think about them and you think about what do they do to fall asleep? What do they tell themselves? I would say probably they don't have to do much. They don't have to really tell themselves much. And their reason is because they're not thinking about it much. They're not worrying. So the ultimate goal is to be able to get to a point where if you sleep, the way you approach it is if I sleep, I sleep. If I don't, I don't. That's it. And that's hard for a lot of people because it's very ingrained in us to be really concerned about how much sleep we get. But the minute you really stop caring about it or stop worrying so much about it, it gets a lot easier. There's a lot less focus on it.
Well, they're like, I don't know, any other tricks that you've come up with to help people? Like, the room should be cooler, not hotter. Make sure your bed is not, a piece of junk that needs to be replaced, lumpy. Don't have the TV on. Obviously, don't have the lights on. Maybe have some ocean sounds, maybe melatonin stuff. I mean, you have to get into all these tricks with people, or is any sound that's like more straightforward?
So I don't use any of those tricks, in fact. But so I can give you like a summary of what I do with people. Is so I have the first thing I have people do is not have a clock in the bedroom at all. So looking at the clock and checking it and counting how many hours, and that usually makes insomnia worse. So no clock. What I said about using the bed only for sleep, so making sure that you're only using the bed for sleep and not doing anything else in bed. The other thing that I do is I have people, if you can't sleep, you're going to get out of bed. So again, giving it that 15 to 20 minutes, that's it. And then you're going to get up and get out of bed. Now, if you wake up in the middle of the night, same thing, like just not lying in bed. Pretty much, more than 15 to 20 minutes at any point in the night. I also have people no napping. So I tell them not to nap. If you need to nap, a 15 to 20 minute nap is all you get. And then the other thing that I make sure that everyone does is I have them get up at the same time every day, no matter what day it is. So we're not going to sleep later on the weekend. And even though I know people love that, and that's one that a lot of people are tied to, we can't really catch up on sleep, and you're better off getting up at the same time and building what's called sleep drive. So like what we talked about, right, is if you go to bed late one night, you still get up at your 6 a.m. time, and you lose sleep, so what? You're building sleep drive, right? The next night, your sleep drive is going to be really high, and you're going to be ready to go to sleep. And so instead of like doing what you might normally do, which is go to bed early, you actually, push it to your regular bedtime at least, or later, and then you'll sleep through the night more easily.
I guess people use the weekends as a crutch. Like, yeah, it's okay if I don't sleep well because on the weekend I'll catch up. So if you kick away the crutch, then they have to perform better all week.
Yeah, sleeping late, it's tough. I know like that's what teenagers do, right? And it's kind of this indulgence for adults as well. I'm just going to sleep late, but it doesn't really help. You can't really catch up, and you're much better off being consistent and setting yourself on a regular consistent.
I can see you'll fool yourself too. Because, I've done that plenty of times, and you sleep late and you wake up like, oh, I feel better. So you think like you did the right thing, and therefore the rest of the week it's okay because you're looking forward to like feeling better when you wake up on the weekend because you slept in later.
But then Sunday night comes, and everyone has a much harder time Sunday night, right?
Oh yeah.
And everyone's wondering why, right? But that's why.
Well, so on these suggestions you're giving, like the first line of defense, like, what if someone's like, it just doesn't work for me? What are some more advanced strategies we have for people?
Well, so the way I do it with people is I meet with them for a session, and I have them keep a sleep diary for 2 weeks. So I'll look at what their sleep diary is telling me, and then I will, when we meet again after that, I'll restrict their schedule. So I give them a certain window of sleep based on what their sleep diary shows. So I tell them all those things, but in addition, I give them a window of time. And as you can imagine, right, people don't love the restriction part. The restriction is to their average. So this is based on like what they're doing anyways. It just feels a little different. And that really, I mean, this really works. So this process is called CBT for insomnia, and it's a therapy that's 70 to 80% effective, which is pretty remarkable for a therapy.
Yeah, no, definitely. What kind of interesting things have you seen in sleep diaries? Like, what do you ask people to write down when you read through them? And maybe that's your favorite bedtime reading, which would be funny. But what's in them that's interesting to you that you've noticed?
So I think sometimes I have gotten, so there's a little note section in the sleep diaries. They're overall, it's a pretty standard questionnaire, like what time did you get in bed? What time did you try to go to sleep? How long did it take you to fall asleep? How many times did you wake up? Those kind of questions. It's a very specific, like a particular set of questions, but there's a comment section, and sometimes people get frustrated with me in the comment section. Comes out that way a little bit. So I have seen that happen before. But, in terms of like trends in the sleep diaries, I see a lot of people like having, kind of a couple short sleep nights in a row and then a long night and then short, long, those kind of things where there's like each person has their own kind of pattern where they find their ways to compensate for sleep, and it's kind of, they've like limped along like that for a while, but and so doing things a different way. I mean, for a lot of people, doing things like changing all your habits and routines, for some people this is like a total relief, and they're like, where's this been all my life? We're just like ready for this. And then other people, it's really tough. It's tough going.
Yeah. Have you ever done like, field research where you go to like a sleep clinic and watch people sleep, or hang out with the technicians and, see like the apnea or, other nighttime phenomena type things, like, or are you confined more to just the cognitive psychotherapy side?
I myself am more on the psychotherapy side. I have not done research in a lab. It's a little outside my training.
Well, I don't know, is there a gap? I mean, you said it's about 80% effective, which is fantastic. Are you chasing the last 20%, or is there what do you think will be any improvements to the therapy you're giving?
I think if people can really embrace this, like really welcome it, because it's hard. Changing is hard. I also work with chronic pain too, and I run into this issue too, is trying to make habit changes that are going to impact your life. Like it's really challenging for people to do that. And I think sometimes there's so much resistance, and that's part of my job, is to work through the resistance and help people kind of see that some of the thoughts they're having, some of these resistances, that it's getting in the way. And that's really what I see my job as being. But I think sometimes the resistances are too much. Like for instance, when it comes to sleep, I've had some people say, well, I just physically need to read in bed, and I'm not going to change that, and that's not going to change. And then they just can't get on board.
I think reading in bed would be so bad if it's a book instead of like your phone. Are there things people can do that will help them that they don't even know they could do? Or so if we back up, so we talked about the going to bed part, no clocks, and tell yourself, this is what I'm doing. But what about the preparation part, the hour or two before bed? What are your suggestions there?
So my suggestion for the hour or two before bed is, yes, have wind down time. Stop working. That's what a lot of people do, especially now that they can work from home, right? Your home is the office, so I can work anytime. Again, my concern is not about screens. So there are some people who have, circadian rhythm issues where their circadian rhythm and their cycle is off, and they may need to limit their screen time a little bit. But they can also, they can use blue light filters on their phone. And I honestly think it's more about just finding relaxing activities. Like if it's really relaxing for you to watch TV, that's not a problem. I personally am not against the screen time before bed. I know some people really feel that's a problem. But as long as you're doing something that's relaxing and that's not like overstimulating, I don't think it's a problem for most people. Like what you said about reading in bed versus the phone in bed, as far as the CBTI goes, you're not allowed to do either one. And so reading in bed is actually not okay.
Because like you were saying many times, the only thing should be for sleeping in the bed to remove all other association.
Exactly. Right. And so I have people come in and they kind of feel like, well, you're going to tell me to take away all my screens, or they are so kind of focused on the screens, and I I'm more focused on the bed than I am on the screen.
Well, I mean, I don't know, is there anything they can do with their bed or again with the room or the ambience or really like, I mean, do you ask people about their sleep environments or you really haven't seen that that's a factor at all?
No, I do. And like the amount of light does matter, like having darkening shades and making sure that the temperature is, if you're sleeping in a really hot room, it's not gonna be helpful for you for sleep. Your body temperature has to cool down to a certain point to be able to fall asleep. And so like a cool, dark room does matter. That stuff does matter. It does. I think what I have learned is that if you're really tired, you're gonna sleep. And, getting yourself to the point where you're really tired is important, right? Every day. So, if you sleep in for 2 hours on a Sunday, you're not going to be really tired on Sunday night. So that's going to be more impactful than anything else.
Like you got to sleep like a mushroom, cold and dark.
Right. And also probably, either not lying in bed as much on the end as you think you should be.
Okay. So what's, I don't know, are there any new innovations coming out that you're aware of in terms of sleep or, we have all the tools we need to address the problem. It's just getting after it.
Yeah. It's just this like being open to change, again, some people come into therapy and they're like, honestly, it can take just a couple weeks and they're way better. Usually the first week of this therapy is hard for people, but I think it's just, some of us really like, and, it's hard. Some of us really like control. Like we really like to be in control, and being like a little bit flexible and changing things, doing things differently is hard.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're like the tough therapist, no nonsense. This is what you got to do to sleep and that's it.
It's funny. I used to not be like this. But I've seen it happen, right? So once you see people get better and you like really see them get better, it's just telling people what to do to get better. That's what I do, really. But I also a talk therapist too. So I do work with people who really do want to kind of delve more into problems, and I do that side of it too. It's just, I think if somebody is coming to me to work specifically on sleep, I feel like I know what to do to help them. And so, yeah, I want to get them better.
Okay. Well, Eddie, so what's the best way for people to get in contact if they need help? Where can they find you?
So the best place is my website, which is dcmetrotherapy.com. And there's a contact page on the website, and that's usually the best way.
Okay. Hey, thank you for coming on the podcast, and I appreciate your brutal honesty in terms of helping people get better. So I hope that people listening take it to heart and realize that you do what you do because it works, not because you're just trying to be nice to people. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.